Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gallop Out, episode 5. My name is Ryan, and today I get the ultimate pleasure of being joined by Kentucky Derby and Churchill Downs race caller. That is Travis Stone. Travis, good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to kind of get to know you a little bit more. You're one of the best race callers in the sport. Obviously, you call the biggest race in the sport. So just to kind of kick things off, kind of what sparked your passion for race calling?
I don't know if there's anything in particular. We used to go to the track all the time. My dad and my mom would join us in Saratoga when I was growing up. And I was one of those kids that would come home and play racing. I'd go to the track, come home and race my Matchbox cars, race marbles, pretend to be a jockey on my bike. And I would always call the race. And excuse me, at some point, I just realized I really liked it or enjoyed it and was sort of mesmerized by it. And when I was 12 years old, I wrote a letter to Tom Durkin, said, I'm a 12-year-old, whatever. I want to be a race caller someday. Do you have any advice for me? A couple months later, he wrote me back, and I was on my way. So, I don't know if it's anything in particular. I just enjoy what the race call brings to the race, much like I enjoy what the broadcasters bring to sporting events.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, you certainly paint a great picture. Obviously, I assume no race is harder to call than the Kentucky Derby. So we'll get into that, in a little bit there. I guess you kind of, it was a great segue into this next question, which is who are some of your biggest influencers or mentors in the sport starting off? Feels safe to say Tom Durkin was somebody you kind of idolized and looked up to. Is obviously he was one of the most iconic race callers in the sport.
Yeah, definitely Tom. Really every race caller out there, you learn something from. And you take a little piece of advice here or there from. So I would say all of those of both the colleagues, peers, and retired announcers as well, Dave Johnson, the like. Beyond that, though, ironically, there's a few pretty significant influences in terms of the craft. One was a auctioneer instructor at auctioneer school in Missouri. I did that for a week. He gave me some advice on how to get your voice to the right level before turning on a microphone. Believe it or not, like one of the most amazing piece of advice I've ever given. Bing bong, bing bong. If you ever have to publicly speak, start out with bing bong, bing bong, and that last bong is where you want to start your voice. Most people they get nervous and they start too high, and if you start too high, there's nowhere to go. So bing bong, bing bong. Welcome to the podcast show. Yeah, welcome to Churchill Downs, rather than welcome to Churchill. Then you're sort of stuck. Right. So he would definitely be one. And then, I actually really enjoy listening to Al Michaels and Joe Buck. No big surprises there, and some of their techniques at delivering big moments. But so all of the above. Even if there's a broadcaster or announcer I don't particularly care for, their style, whatever, understanding that it is style and art, and that it's not for everybody a particular style. I take something away from everybody.
Absolutely, yeah. I love that you. I love the bing bong, bing bong. I'll probably have to take that, into consideration for some, for any public speaking that I do, because that's always a good note. And then as an auctioneer, yeah, I could see how that would kind of translate over for sure with, having to, just go fast and be able to, alliterate and talk quickly and get everything going. So in your just career as a race caller, do you have a particular moment or anything that stands out in your career? So maybe not necessarily even a race, just like a kind of a pivotal moment for you.
The very first race I called at Suffolk Downs, it was the dead of winter, 2003-ish maybe. Larry Comas invited me to call a race. He actually invited me to call two. They turned down to the backstretch, and it was just one of those moments in the binoculars. You're like, this is fun. I can do this. I still have a memory burn of that moment. So that's definitely one of them. The first time I'd ever been to the Kentucky Derby was the first Kentucky Derby I was going to have to call. So that was a wild experience. Just the whole, for anybody that's never been to the Derby, it's one thing to be involved in the operation of the race, if you will. But everything else around it is daunting, from parking to getting in to security to you name it. And if you're not careful, it can really derail your day. So that was definitely that first Derby sort of, and even to this prior year, learning different ways of doing things to kind of keep the anxiety to a minimum. And then I would have to say, growing up, just a lot of the star thoroughbreds that were captivating to me, from Dahair to Cigar, Flanders, Surfside, some of those horses, that beautiful pleasure. Just, horses I really love to watch, and then you get to hear the race call alongside it. Just made everything better. So I'd probably do those things.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a lot of great insight. Obviously, you do a great job of telling a story kind of as the race goes on. It's not just about, so-and-so is here and so-and-so is there. You do a really good job of picking up horses that are making a move, or horses that, appear to be tiring, how their ears look as they're kind of turning for home, what, the jockey's doing. So all that to kind of lead into race calling isn't just about kind of describing what happens. It's about capturing the emotion of the moment. So in a race such as the Kentucky Derby, or, any kind of big race like that, even down to, those lower level claiming races, how do you balance those aspects?
Well, the Derby is such an outlier. It really is an outlier. So put that off to the side for a moment. In day-to-day racing, I think there's an element of, well, yeah, you mentioned it. You're telling a story, and part of that story is how these horses are moving, or how the jockey is asking them to go, how the horse is responding. You have to be very careful as a race caller not to forecast or predict what's going to happen, because that just gets you into trouble. You have to just describe what's happening. And I spend a lot of time when I'm not in the booth, and even when I'm in the booth, working on ways to better describe things, or think about the delivery to make it all sound better. So that's definitely part of it. I think the observation of how horses are moving, what their ears are doing, how the jockey is going, how they're responding, that comes with just a lot of hours looking through binoculars and looking at horses. I don't, for whatever reason, I have a knack for it, in that I can watch races and I can get a sense of how horses are moving or traveling, and it's just purely from reps. It's not some sort of innate skill or something I was born with. It's just reps, calling a lot of races and picking up on a lot of cues and watching replays and picking them up there and all that jazz. So, but as a race caller, you can be made to look like a fool if you sit there and just try and predict who's going to win on the far turn, because you get an idea of who's moving well or who's going to make a move. Right. But yeah, it's dangerous if you get into that prediction territory. And who cares about being a hero? Sometimes I think some other race callers want to be the hero and describe what's in, who's moving the best of all type stuff. I just think that gets you into trouble in the long run. Yeah,
definitely. I could definitely see, your point there, and how, predictions. Well, maybe you're right. Some of the time, if you're wrong, that's, not gonna look great, and people are gonna remember the wrong more than the right. I think, in the long run of things. Mm-hmm. So obviously you mentioned that you were in auctioneer school. So is it safe to say that's kind of the career path you would have gone had you not gone into horse racing, or what do you think would have been the alternate career had it not been for the thoroughbreds?
It's actually a great question. The reason why I went to auctioneer school is my dad was a New York State police officer, and one of his coworkers retired and started a real estate auction company. And I did some website work for him for a couple of summers, and then did a little bit more one summer. And then he was like, "You want to go to auctioneer school?" I was always wanting to be a race caller. So perhaps I would have gone down that path. I don't know if I particularly would have enjoyed it for the long term, even though it can be a very lucrative business. I probably would have gotten into computer science in some capacity, or data. I like data, particularly horse racing data. So maybe that's a great question, though. I probably would have. Who knows? I can't stay and sit still. So if I'm not calling races, I'm always tinkering or working on something, or finding a new hobby, or an exploration, if you will. So who knows what would have happened if the race calling bug didn't hit me.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing we don't have to worry about that because you seem locked into race calling. But you mentioned that you might go into some sort of data analytics or horse racing data. So to kind of go over to that, I hear that you're a pretty sharp handicapper as well. So do you do anything like tournament wise? Are you like a handicap tournament player? Do you just kind of do it like for fun? Does it help you with your race calling or anything, knowing where some horses are going to be positioned? Yeah.
Well, I take the pretty sharp handicapper rumor with a grain of salt based upon how Saratoga went for a couple of weeks, although we rallied at the end. No, we had a good meet this year. I think that handicapping makes me a better race caller because it makes me think about the race in the right way. It allows me to bring handicapping themes or handicapping, I don't want to say thoughts, but just describe the race with the horse player in mind in a way. And so I definitely think those two go hand in hand, which I think is a good thing ultimately. And also handicapping keeps you in touch with the product, in touch with the industry, and with one of its core customers, which is the horse player, who I'm a big advocate for. So yeah, I mean, I will play some tournaments. I don't play a ton of them. I like to play the Keeneland ones. It's right down the road here from Louisville. I play the ones on Saturdays in Saratoga when we're up there. It's not like a focus of my year. I mean, a lot of guys and gals out there really try and qualify for things. I try on a more of a recreational scale and not as a quasi-pro scale. But I will say some of my best friends in racing and now life I've met through that handicapping and tournament scene, which is cool. So, yeah.
For sure. No, it's a good crowd, all the handicappers. I get the opportunity to kind of speak with Tom Quigley. I work over at Del Mar.
Yeah.
So I speak with like Frank Scatoni, Tom Quigley, and I've gotten to meet a lot of really cool people for sure. And that's kind of led me to get the chance to interview you today. So, it all kind of connects. Horse racing is a great community. Just to kind of stick on the topic of Churchill Downs, you guys start your fall meet September 12th, I believe, in a couple of weeks here, and a week from yesterday, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
What do you? I know it's 3 or 4 weeks, and then they go Keeneland, and then they're back.
It's effectively 3 weeks, 14 days, 2 5-week-days, and 1 4. We start on Thursday. It's a cool little meet. So we won't have any turf this year, as they're still trying to get that turf course in order. Looks great. Hopefully it's good for November. We got a great little stakes program. Road to the Oaks and the Derby kicks off. And just a couple of races here or there that you just never know who's going to pop up in. We've had some pretty good runners over the years in some of these stakes races. But September, my favorite time of the year in Kentucky is the fall. So we're sort of late summer now, pushing into the fall. The weather is still pretty good here. In fact, it's pretty warm today. It'll be warm for the next few weeks, and just makes for a great day at the track and good racing, and sets up Keeneland well, which is a lot of fun, and then brings us into, in my opinion, one of the best meets of the year throughout the country is the fall meet at Churchill, where you've got 2-year-olds and you got a bunch of stuff going on. It's the next 3 months are really fun to be a racing fan, and kicks off on Thursday.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those kind of abbreviated fall meets as you guys have, and Santa Anita also has their 4-week kind of autumn meet there before we go Keeneland and Del Mar for that other abbreviated fall meet. And then Churchill Downs, obviously Aqueduct on the East Coast, but then sticking with the West Coast, Santa Anita and Churchill both really kind of carry the weight of those like kind of long winter months of like getting through the winter, and you guys have really good cards and really good programs and everything going through to because that is kind of the downtime almost after Breeders' Cup. It's when you're kind of getting the next that next flight. All the 2-year-olds are kind of maturing into their 3-year-old season, everything like that. So it's really carrying a lot of weight there.
Yeah, I would tell people don't sleep on November after Breeders' Cup. I get it. Breeders' Cup sort of this quasi end of the season, and a lot of people shut down until opening day Santa Anita. But if you're checking out that day after Breeders' Cup, you're missing out on some great racing in many spots. I think Aqueduct November is historically and consistently one of the best months of racing there. I would say the same thing at Churchill. And obviously Del Mar is pretty cool. any time of year. But yeah, I mean, November is a great time, and then like I think the landscape has changed quite a bit. Turfway in the winters now a robust signal to follow, big fields, and I don't think that the synthetic track there plays as random as some other ones. I think it's got a little bit more form to it, and obviously fairgrounds and Oaklawn and stuff like that as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, but the one thing I would say is don't sleep on November. November post Breeders' Cup is great racing. It's a great time to
Ab-
be involved.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And then, yeah, you touched on it briefly. The racing product at Turfway for that synthetic course is incredible because
Yeah.
it does play a little more consistent than some of the others. And just
Mhm.
the field sizes, the competition, any of the levels that you kind of see there during the
Yeah.
winter months. Yeah, it's definitely
And it's night
definitely,
racing too, right? I mean, for the most
absolutely.
part, like everything else is done for the day, and you can sit down and play some pretty juicy pick fives at a place like Turfway in the evening. It's great.
Absolutely. There's no better feeling than, ending the day at, Aqueduct or Santa Anita and then looking and it's like, oh, 4 p.m. Turfway starts. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. We got
Mhm.
something to watch tonight. No,
Mhm.
it's a great racing product that continues through the seasons. And yeah, you said it best. The winter months of racing are no time to sleep because that's when a lot of the work gets done.
Yeah.
And it is a great product that's presented. I do want to kind of get into the Derby, obviously, as that is, as you pointed out, the outlier. 20 horse field at the most. How long does that take you to prepare? Obviously, with the draw being about a week prior.
I start preparing. Well, I watch all of the preps throughout the year, so I'm not acutely aware, but surface level aware of every horse that's thinking about Derby. Once the final preps come around, that's when the real work begins. So I have a worksheet that I have for each horse after the first final prep, if you will. I fill out the worksheet with that horse's name and some of its connections and start just doing notes. I watch all their replays. I think about things to say, think about things to think about, or considerations. Or I'm trying to think of an example from this year. Once the race is over, I sort of wipe it out of my brain. But
Sure.
I'll make something up. As an example, for Mystic Dan, Brian Hernandez is just such a savvy rider, and he often finds an inside path, much like Calvin Burrell. Not quite like Calvin. He's willing to do other things beside be a hero up the inside. But that'd be something I might write down. Like, watch for Brian sticking to the inside. Things like that. So I do that for every single horse, starting in the final round of preps. For the draw is a lot of work because rather than just draw pills and be boring, we like to make a bit of a show out of it. So I have to do a lot of, I call a lot of the trainers and owners and jockeys and talk to them about their mounts and their runners and stuff. But it's really just about all of that preparation and leaving nothing to chance. Using flashcards to make sure the silks are memorized. You want those silks memorized before Derby week even comes around, because there's so many events and demands Derby week. It's tough that you can't prepare Derby week. You have to be prepared by Derby
Absolutely.
week. And then Derby week itself the goal is to stay as calm as possible all week long. It is tough. There's stuff happening at every turn and makes you think about it and who's your Derby horse here and that, this, that, and the other. So, yeah, that's the objective, is to just get prepared early and stay calm as we lead up to it.
Absolutely. And, it's not like they make it any easier on you on Derby Day itself, because you got about 13 races before you actually get to the real Derby. So you have about 8.5 hours of calling races before you actually get to the Derby that you spent, so much time preparing for.
Yeah.
And your preparation certainly is always tested because you mentioned Brian Hernandez of this past one. His tendencies to want to try and be patient, find an opening on the rail. You have a horse that's coming in from Japan and Forever Young. You have a horse with lugging in tendencies like Sierra Leone that you're able to kind of call as it's happening in real time. But then going back 2 years ago, there's a horse that comes from the clouds, wins it. What was it, 88-1? And you managed to pick him up while two horses for two top trainers and Asmussen and Chad Brown are kind of dueling down the lane. What was that kind of feeling like?
I thought I truly thought I had a stroke right after the race. I got this shooting pain up this, like, basically in my neck. I was later told it was just a tension deal. But at one point I was like, man, am I stroking out? That was both wild and just unbelievable because when you call races, you don't horses that move late, I'm going to say 95% of the time, come from the outside, and they rarely come from the rail. And if you go back and watch Kentucky Derbies, you can go back 50 years. The race winner is almost always first or second at the eighth pole, like a huge percentage of the time. So as part of the preparation, you think about that. You're like, okay, when they hit the eighth pole, the race is likely decided, not always, but likely. And then they hit the eighth pole, and it's two of the favorites, like Epicenter and Zandon were supposed to be the two. And so, okay, here we are. We've got the two favorites with a furlong to go. Let's call this race. And Rich Strike sort of snuck up the inside and completely blew it all up. I have no idea how. Obviously, it was a great ride and a big pace, and an unfortunate loss for Epicenter because he ran the best race by far. No, so they crossed the wire. I thought I stroked out. That was wild. So this year's went much better.
Yeah, definitely. No, that had to be just a surreal moment to think like, oh, this horse that just drew in basically that morning with the scratch of, I forget the horse, but draws in, and then all of a sudden we see that. Yeah.
At the draw, we hear that he gets in. And I remember saying to some of our TV folks, so we're going with Sonny Leone, right? Because none of us truly knew how to say the name because we hadn't done the prep work because he was just an impossibility. So good thing we got that right. But
absolutely. No, and you had called, I believe it was was it a maiden claiming race that he had won at Churchill earlier on in his career, and he obviously won it well. But I think one of the funniest parts of that Derby, at least to me, was after the fact, all the analysts were just scrambling to try and find some way to just explain how that happened. They were just like, oh, well, I guess he came from behind at church. Like he had a race over the track, I guess. And it was one of those races that it was really incredible to watch. Certainly we'll never forget it. And it's kind of had a lasting effect on derbies and big races because we haven't seen any prices, I think, above 30 to 1 or something like that.
I mean, I just think I think it shows you that the Derby is just like the race. There are so many variables, so many dynamics. It's a wild 2 minutes, and literally anything can happen, and it has been happening. And it never fails to deliver. And now with the build out of the first turn and the first turn grandstand and some of the other areas, the atmosphere leading up to the Derby is unlike any other. And I said it 2 years ago when they were getting ready to go to the gate for Mage, when Mage beat Two Phils. The energy of the 30 minutes from the moment that Patrick Mahomes gave riders up to the moment that they crossed the wire, I don't think you would find a more sustained 30 minutes of just insane anxiety and excitement and curiosity and just a buzz that was unlike any other. And last year was the same thing. For whatever reason, the Derby is just like the right formula for everything that is horse racing, and it's awesome. It can be 80 to 1, or it can be a favorite. It's still so cool.
Absolutely, and it proves that being in the race gives you a shot. So many times, you'll look at a field and it'll be Asmussen at a short price, or Chad Brown on turf and it'll be a short price, or Baffert here on the West Coast. But there it's like, okay, like this year we had, Kenny McPeak, and we had Jorge Delgado, and we had Eric Reed. So just getting in the starting gate is such a key to the Derby, obviously, as you got to run the race.
Maybe the one thing that gets under my skin more than anything else in racing today, well, there's a lot of things that do, right? We all love this game and want to see it do better, but are the desire of people to compare the race records of Derby winners. And it's like, this year's Derby winner hasn't won a race since or whatever. And I just want to sort of shout at them, who cares? The Derby is what it is because of what it is. Like to win the Derby, so many things have to go right. The window is so small. You could even make the race, and then you can be like Fierceness and break half a step slow, have to rush up, and you're going to end up empty. Yep. I mean, who cares what the record is of these horses that come out of it? Because once you're a Derby winner, you're always a Derby. Nobody ever goes back and says, that Masters was a fluke for that golfer because of the way the race was and the way that ball bounced. Like, get out of here. Once you they don't take that green jacket away because of ifs, buts, candy, and nuts. So like, that's like my biggest pet peeve right now is these people that want to compare it. And there's one race that everybody wants to win, and that's that Derby. And
it is.
Once you do it, you can't. Eric Reed will always be a Kentucky Derby winning trainer.
Yep.
Which
can't take that away.
Yeah, exactly.
That's on his resume forever, and that is. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't love that everybody is so hyper focused on. Okay, well these 19, 20 horses ran in the Derby. Let's all see how they're doing. Coming out of that race, it's like everybody pointed towards the Derby thing.
Right, and I think that persists, and it sort of permeates throughout the rest of racing. It is okay to lose races. There's this obsession over high win percentages for some of the barns, and this like if you don't win, if you're not first, you're nowhere type stuff. Like these are horses, and they're coming and going out of form. The way races are run sometimes doesn't suit their favor. Like Arthur's Ride lost the Jockey Club Gold Cup because Highland Falls decided to take it to him. Did Arthur's Ride lose any luster because he won he's a Whitney winner, and he's going to be one of the main horses to beat in the Breeders' Cup. Like, get out of here because he didn't win. And I'd rather see, and I'll credit Bill Mott, he's one of the trainers that is not afraid to run horses. If they're healthy and feeling good, they run, and it's okay to lose races. I sort of think that is a lost aspect of this game.
I agree. And I like that you pointed out Bill Mott because he will run. He's not scared about losing a race. He knows that's a part of the game. You can't get, a lifetime of, flight lines, even though he only ran the 6. Like you can't get that. So you can get a horse that when they tell you they're ready, you run them. And if they get beat, they get beat. And you brought up a great point. Arthur's Ride was probably going to, on paper was walking on the front end, but Pratt gave him a great ride and got the upper hand. So it all comes down to actually running the race. So, people being hyper-focused on, you got to win every race. And, this horse didn't win the last race. That means you can't use it. Like, I've never understood that one either. And more so to the point of, keeping track of how they do out of the Derby. Because I think it almost causes some to, reset and you got to kind of get back, on a track. So it's not something where I think it's, super important to pay attention to stuff like that.
Yeah. Great.
Kind of just on the, not necessarily maybe the Derby, because obviously Rich Strike was crazy, but what's maybe the most unexpected or what's like the craziest kind of thing that's ever happened to you while you were in the announcer's booth?
When I was calling races at Louisiana Downs, a horse broke through the gate. They all broke. He didn't break early. They broke through the gate. He stumbled and lost his rider. The horse turned around, walked back through the gate, and took off the wrong way on the racetrack. And if anybody knows horses, that's obviously just a remarkably dangerous scenario and situation. But luckily, going down the backstretch, he went to the way outside, and the race was sort of down to the rail. So that would definitely be the most wild and sort of tense situation that I've ever experienced while in the booth. And just some other random stuff. I like to have guests in the booth, and sometimes they don't heed the warnings of keeping quiet, including a group of older ladies who had a great time and a lot of wine and decided to cheer when they were coming down the stretch in a race once. That was kind of wild. Other random things here or there, bugs flying in your face type thing. But now that horse going backward through the gate, that was crazy. Absolutely. Yeah.
That sounds nuts for a horse to break and then go back through that tight opening and then to run the opposite direction.
Yeah, literally tossed the rider, turned around, and went right back through. I mean, that was so strange. And then
that's bizarre. Almost like you got to wonder how that happened.
Yeah.
Okay. I do have a question as for just how getting the next generation, we'll say, into horse racing. You mentioned the bettors are an integral part of the horse playing game and horse racing as a whole. I would say equally as important is kind of getting the next generation into horse racing, much like you got into it, much like your dad got into it and everything like that. What do you think is something that's important to kind of get the next generation in?
I'll answer that with a two-part same answer. One is racing needs to take itself more seriously, and racing needs to embrace the horse player as one of its two core customers. The other core customer being, and I would argue, sort of the horse and the horse's owner. Though I've always said, if you take care of the horse and you take care of the horse player, the rest should take care of itself. In my opinion, racing has not looked at horse players in the right light for a long time. And now in this modern day, horse players, and I'm going to now say gamblers, have many options. They can log onto their phone and play last night's NFL game. They can play tonight's NFL game, and they can do so at a much lower takeout, if you will. And I don't think racing has the answer for that right now. And so whatever we have to do, and I think racing's doing a good job of taking care of the horse. We've made great strides there, whether it be aftercare, pre-race care, veterinary care, scratching horses that probably don't belong. I think all that stuff has turned the right corner, but the horse player stuff has not. And we need to take ourselves more seriously with that group because, my brother's generation, my brother's 10 years younger than me, and I'm going to assume you're younger than my brother, your generation, like there's options now. There's other things that we can do as gamblers, and racing has maybe its greatest characteristic is that it's truly a game of skill. It is rewarding. It pays off when you put in the work, and we have to make it competitive from a pricing standpoint and the other elements of it, whether it be stewards' decisions, they have to get more consistent. The presentation of racing data and racing information has to get more consistent. Tote has to be instant. We should get away from tote cycles and waiting 30 seconds for an odds update. I mean, I can Venmo you after this call and you get the money within seconds. Right? Yeah. Why can't that apply to parimutuel wagering? Parimutuel wagering is a great, it's just a great gambling option, the competitive aspect of it. But if the technology doesn't support it, it doesn't matter. So I think all of those things. And then if you do all of that, and then get into the area of why it's so cool to sit down with 2 pages of past performances and deciphering what's going to happen, and then kibitzing with your friends about it, and like, what do you think here? What do you think there? No, this is why this is going to happen. And then you start to latch on to horses and you want to bet them back next time. And it's just a cycle that feeds itself. So yeah, I would say those two. I think we're checking the box on taking care of the horse. Now we just got to check the box on taking care of the horse player. If we do that, I think it takes care of itself. I think racing gets back on the right path.
Absolutely. I think that was all really well put. And yeah, I think checking the box of horse safety had to come first, and I'm happy it did. Because I think that will in turn lead horse players to be more willing to play. But then, yes, you brought it up that we need to, horse players need to be taken care of, or at least looked after, whether that's just having more clarity and transparency, as you mentioned, with stewards' decisions. And then, yeah, of course, the totes with the late odds change after they're already running. That's not, a great look. Even if it did lock when the gates open, like it's still, you're looking at a horse that breaks at 4-1, finishes at 8-5, and you're wondering what happened to your money, essentially. And then, with the ease and the popularity of sports betting, with it becoming legal in more and more states, I think there's definitely something that we need, like we as horse racing individuals need to do to market the game better, because when you really get into it, we have one of the best sports when it comes to being able to get an edge on other people, because we aren't betting against Vegas like you do with all those other sports, with whether it's football, basketball, cricket, whatever. You're betting against other bettors. So that's part of the reason favorites are 33% since the beginning of time with horse racing, is that, people are only right about a third of the time with what horse they're going to bet. And I think that's a huge advantage to have. And the fact that, as you mentioned, you can sit down with 2 pages of past performances and kind of get the edge on other bettors that, don't have that. Maybe they just like the color of the silk, so they like the trainer or whatever it is. Everybody's going to be right at some time, but you have the opportunity to be right a lot more if you really, get into it. And it is a cycle that feeds itself, because if you really like a horse and that horse runs, a bang up second, you're like, okay, when that horse runs again, that's my horse. Like, I'm picking that one. I know he has the ability, et cetera. So it's a cycle that feeds itself. You're absolutely right. And I think once horse racing takes care of the horse player and just kind of keeps trying to promote what is the greatest part about our sport, and that's, the actual racing. And as you said, yeah, we've made huge strides of taking care of the horse, and the horse and the animals have to come first, and that's what we've kind of gotten our head wrapped around and prioritized, which is good.
It was needed. We got complacent. It was needed, and I'm happy to see. Yeah, I mean, it's happened very quickly too, right? Over the past 3, 4, 5 years, things have gone in the right direction. Now we just got to take care of the other half of the formula.
Absolutely, and hopefully horse racing does that, and then we can continue this beautiful game. Before we get out of here, I do want to ask you, what was your like kind of favorite, so non-race calling, what is your favorite memory at a racetrack?
In 2001, 2001, my dad and I went to a Knicks preseason game, went to the Meadowlands on Friday night after Belmont on Friday afternoon, and then went to the Breeders' Cup on Saturday. It was so miserably cold. We didn't even sit in our seats. But I remember for the Classic, we were standing outside, and there was a fellow from Europe next to me. It was then me and my dad. And he asked me who I liked, and I was like, well, I like Thurs Sept. I said, how about you? He goes, I like Saki. And obviously the race was just an unbelievable race. We stood right at the 8th pole. And even though we had won, I say we, and his horse had lost, there were still high fives all around because it was one of the coolest things. I tell people all the time, if you go to the races for the first time, don't worry about sitting next to the finish line. At the finish line, the race is over. At the 8th pole to the top of the stretch is where things are unfolding. And I have memory burns of so many moments in that stretch drive. I'll never forget it. And I'll be honest with you, like this year's Travers, I was a little bit beyond the finish line. That brought some of that back. Like, and I in fact, I tweeted about it when the horses bring their A game and deliver, there's nothing better. There's nothing better. And
absolutely,
we saw that this year, and I'll never forget seeing that in 2001 either.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the 2001, I only got into racing in about 2019, so but I've done my part to try and watch as many old school classic replays as I can. So yeah, seeing the 2001 Classic where Thurs Sept wins it for America, great call. So yeah, I'm happy that was one of your memories, because that's certainly something I've watched the race a good handful of times.
Quick side note on that one: everybody always talks about Saki and Thurs Sept. Albert the Great ran an unbelievably big race. He's a little horse player in me. There was a headwind down the backstretch, and he set a scorching pace right into the face of that wind and was still in contention at the 8th pole. I told Nick Zito a couple years ago that was one of the more underrated performances in Breeders' Cup history. So next time you watch it, watch how good Albert the Great runs, because he truly ran his eyeballs out.
I will. In fact, I'll go watch that. We'll go watch that right now once we kind of wrap up here. Travis, I can't thank you enough for joining me. That was a lot of great insight. Those were great answers. I really appreciated just talking to you, getting to know you, and I think the viewers are going to love that too, because you had a lot of cool racing history to share. You had a lot of cool experiences, whether it's auction school or your preparation for calling a 20-horse field where a horse wins drawn off the also eligible list. I think that was a lot of really great insight. So I can't thank you enough. My pleasure, and come say hello at Churchill sometime. Absolutely. I hope to get out there, certainly for the fall meet when, the real racing starts, as you said best. You bet. All right, Travis, have a good one. Take care. Thanks.